Estimados los invitados.
Distinguished guests, we invite you to take your seats. Now we have our next panel that are NIL, Name, Image and Likeness in the NCAA Lesson for Latin America.
Name, Image and Likeness en NCAA. Lección para América Latina.
Rosen, Associate Professor and Academic Director of the Intellectual Property Center at the University of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce, USA. Francisco Morello, Legal and Compliance Director of Adidas, Argentina. Moderator, José Antonio Fabara, Senior Associate at Bustamante Fabara from Ecuador.
Aló, 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 ¿sí? ¿Me escuchan? Buenos días con todos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. This panel is NIL, Name, Image and Likeness in NCAA Lesson for Latin America.
The panelists, we are going to do it in a two-way strike changing between Spanish and English in a Spanglish format, so that everyone feels comfortable in their mother tongue language. With this, I'm going to introduce Zvi, that we are honored to welcome him. He's an associate professor at the University of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce School of Law. Professor Rosen teaches copyright, trademark law, and intellectual property fundamentals, and serves as a faculty director of the Franklin Pierce Intellectual Property Society. Throughout his academic career, he has held academic positions at Southern Illinois University School of Law, the Maurice A. Dean School of Law at Hofstra University, and George Washington University School of Law. He also serves as the Abraham L. Kamenstein Resident Scholar at the U.S. Copyright Office. Welcome, Zvi. And as you may see in the picture, he was a potential talent in baseball. Francisco Morello, he's the Legal and Compliance Director at Adidas, Argentina. Francisco is an experienced corporate and business lawyer who brings a strategic, commercially focused perspective to legal practice. Throughout his career, he has worked closely with virtually every area of business, including marketing, sales, retail, finance, operations, and human resources, providing comprehensive advice on commercial, regulatory, intellectual property, and labor matters. Francisco has played a key role in helping one of the world's most recognized brands navigate complex legal and compliance challenge. And since he was little, he was a great fan of River and using the Adidas brand since then. Welcome, Francisco.
Gracias.
So this NIL matter that we are covering today, it's one of the greatest discussions on the last years in the college sports and the American sports in the US. The NIL framework has fundamentally changed the landscape in the last few years and has changed how players, specifically in college sports, and with effects, as we are going to see also in high school, on how these are remunerated and how they receive their compensation. So to start introducing this topic, Zvi, and considering that we Latin Americans not necessarily have a complete understanding on sports in the US, what's the NCAA?
So the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA, was formed about 120 years ago, and it's really the body that regulates college sports in the USA. If they have essentially a monopoly on all college sports in the United States, they make essentially all the rules. They are a key regulatory gatekeeper, as the slide says, and basically, if you want to do anything related to college sports, it goes through the NCAA. Now, there's been some accusation that the NCAA is a way for certain universities to get away with practices they couldn't do otherwise. That's ultimately what the Supreme Court would later hold. But so yeah, they are the umbrella group for all college sports in the United States.
And it's completely different for us in Latin America, as we are not used to see a game with the impact of the American college sports, but the numbers of the NCAA are like shocking for us.
Yeah. So I saw a number this morning that I was going to give as well, which is that the total valuation of only the top 75 college sports programs in the United States is over $50 billion. It's a tremendous amount of money. Just looking at college football, and football, I should say, when I say football, I mean American football. I know that's going to cause a little confusion as this continues. We tried to figure out something better to say, but if I say football, I mean American football. So football is the largest sport, although basketball at college is very big as well. But the viewership for this year's college football championship was 30 million people, but you had double digits for all the playoff games in college football. The only exception is the bottom two were games where a school got in that didn't belong, and people knew it would be a blowout, and it was. And even some of these smaller games, the viewership for even these minor bowl games, and a lot of these minor bowl games are games that frankly a school pays to get into, was 3 million. This is, and just casually viewing, there are many other games as well that are not, this is only the bowl games and the end of season games. If you have a big mid-season matchup, you're looking at double-digit viewership. College football is an absolutely massive financial juggernaut in the United States, and that's not all there is. There's other college sports at all. March Madness, some of you may have heard of. March Madness is the annual playoff in March, although it often goes in quite deep into April increasingly. The men's Final Four is the semifinals and the finals average 14 million viewers. And even more than that, the whole tournament goes on quite a bit. I was telling an anecdote. I once had when I was still in practice, I had a trial that was going to be happening in Delaware, and a certain federal judge, who's now retired, informed us the trial would have to be delayed because of March Madness. So this really is a massive economic driver. And I should say, although those two are the largest, baseball is also big. University of New Hampshire, our biggest college sports team is actually ice hockey, which perhaps if some of you have been to our beautiful campus, especially in the winter, you won't be entirely surprised at that. And there are others as well. Gymnastics. I'm not sure if anyone here has heard of Livy Dunn. She's a gymnast at at Louisiana State, and she is making $5 million on NIL as a gymnast.
Wow.
So she's
still in the university, or
I'm not sure if she's graduated by now, but she was one of the top NIL earners as a gymnast, and she has, I think, millions, if not tens of millions, of Instagram followers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Francisco, supuestamente, digamos, este deporte universitario en Estados Unidos.
Supposedly, this is a mature sport, but the numbers approach professional levels of payment. So how is this compared? What's the parallel between the NCAA and South America or Latin America? Can you hear me? Well, first of all, Jose, let me thank you for the invitation. I thank the authorities and all friends that we have in Paraguay. You have truly made us feel at home. I think that we have been having a very good time here, and then allow me to tell you that I work in Argentina, but I will try to bring to you some numbers and some ideas of why this change that Zvi will talk about from the technical legal point of view. Why is it so important for a German company that wants to set foot in the U.S.? The U.S. market is naturally it's a state that has consumers. So regulatory changes, legal changes that have happened in the latest years in college and in high school have opened opportunities, golden opportunities for this company so that they can set foot in a market that was always very complex. Therefore, before I answer, I will try to tell you about a German company from the point of view of a German company when they have the opportunity to do some business and enter into the heart of North America. Now, going back to the question, Jose, I think that is completely different. I see there William Pacho, and I don't know if you know them. They played in the Champions League against each other. We saw the match they played together, and here we see the champions, Santiago Wanderers. I think that he is from Libertadores from 2018, the sub-20 team, and we see a hockey match there in Buenos Aires. This is a match in a neighborhood close to my home that was between Olivos and San Fernando. This is the amateur sports in Latin America today. It doesn't have the same platform or the strength or the investment that sports have in the U.S. But however, in its own manner, we still have great athletes come out in hockey, field hockey, football, and others. I think that we don't have the strength that the American market has and at the universities. I don't think so, but that's a data point. But we do have what is nursery, so to speak, where we develop talent. It's very similar to what happens in Europe with canteras. And I'll talk about football. We see two very good athletes there. They have their own investments, then they have their sponsors, and we train athletes year after year so that a few of them, not all of them, they can then become the idols that we all know in the world. But the closest idea is absolutely nothing like the American market. But however, we do obtain athletes that are great. The nurseries for the NFL or MLB, these would be the university itself. But here in Latin America, each club has their own training schools. The universities have the clubs that have the greatest resources can do this more. There are other clubs in other sports, hockey, basketball, tennis, and others, and it's more difficult for them. So comparing one to another, once again, the result that the college and high school training yields different results. Can you tell us of any specific cases? The impact on these lower divisions, training divisions, they don't make a real big impact, such a big impact so as to need an NIL agreement or framework. No, not at all. The way in which we do contracts is different. That's why Zvi will tell us in more detail about the NIL. However, it still is complex. When we have to look at the nursery or the training school, there's a lot of investments by the clubs, but also people who train athletes themselves that are at a disadvantage. And it still is a market that is at the bottom of the pyramid of the industry. It is huge. It is large. Latin America is the training school of the sports training school of the world. However, at the top of the pyramid, we see that it's more and more difficult to reach that top point of the pyramid. There's a lack of investment. There is a lack of resources that we can tell us about. In the American market, investment is more accessible.
What's really NIL?
Well, and we're going to talk about this more coming up. NIL, if you take the literal meaning, is name, image, and likeness. So this is a form of the right of publicity. So the right of publicity allows one to control how one's identity is used publicly. And it's really focused at its core on advertising, but also other uses as well. It forbids the commercial use of one's identity without consent. So basically, you aren't allowed to use someone's picture in an advertisement without their permission. This comes from a number of cases where companies tried to use someone's right of publicity in an advertisement. In the USA, this is entirely a creature of state law, and there is actually substantial heterogeneity or variety among the states. So New York's right of publicity law, for instance, is fairly narrow. California's is rather broad, and somewhat confusingly, the state of Indiana, which is not necessarily known as a commercial hotbed, has the broadest right of publicity law of all. There have been proposals for a federal right of publicity for a couple of reasons. This is actually coming out some in cases of individuals using the pictures of others without their consent, which is of course a very separate issue, but it also might involve right of publicity, and it's gotten tied together with having a federal right of publicity law for sports. So that's been discussed. There have been numerous proposals, notably the No Fakes Act, but they have not become federal law.
And one of the first cases regarding rights of publicity was the Johnny Carson case. Can you give an introduction to this case?
Yeah, so some of our audience, although I'm afraid to say you might be showing your age if you remember this, even the US, Johnny Carson was the leading American late night TV host from the early 1960s until 1991. And when he came on stage, his announcer would always say, "Here's Johnny," in that tone only, louder. And that was used to identify him. Well, a proprietor of porta potties in Michigan said, "I have an idea." And he said, "Here's Johnny, world's foremost commodian." Commode as another word for a toilet. And Johnny Carson sued. And the court held that his right of publicity had been violated. The court noted that a celebrity's legal right of publicity is invaded whenever his identity is intentionally appropriated for commercial purposes. So even though it wasn't his picture, it wasn't his voice, his identity had been appropriated. You were using the catchphrase of "Here's Johnny," used to identify Johnny Carson on his very well-known television program, was being appropriated, and thus a right of publicity had been violated.
And how this became like, or how is NIL becoming so challenging in the new agreements? Because it's, as we were talking the past days, it's not really about NIL.
Yeah, and it's tricky because NIL is not about NIL unless it is. And that's what's sort of so confusing about the whole discussion about NIL, which is there is real NIL and fake NIL. So a line of cases we're going to talk about in a little bit established that college athletes were allowed to get paid for their NIL. And so the core NIL of name, image, likeness is based on long-standing IP principles that I believe, and Francisco will talk about this more, are applicable in Latin America just as much as the USA, with different contours, but just as much. It's based with long-standing IP right. However, in practice, it's understood that a lot of what's being called NIL in US college athletics has almost nothing to do with use of name, image, and likeness in endorsements.
But this is because the NCAA kind of limited or prohibited the possibility for college athletes to receive a compensation for them playing in the different leagues.
So that's exactly right. The NCAA has always insisted on whether players are amateurs. They are students who play sports. And in the top schools, it's long been known this is essentially a fiction, and there were various ways to pay them. It was always a bit of a joke that the top players at major schools were driving these fancy cars they never could have afforded, that someone had bought for them, who knows who. But until 2021, current college athletes were not permitted to do endorsement deals. Following a U.S. Supreme Court decision in 2021, it became clear they could. And these colleges have used various ways to do what they call NIL, to recruit and retain top athletes. How do they do it? Well, the athlete might do a meet and greet with key donors and be paid $1 million for it, for instance. Is that for fair market value? Probably not. But it's a way to give them the money and to say, no, this is not pay to play, this is NIL. So it's okay under the NCAA rules. So it's a way to get around what remains of the NCAA rules about amateurism, to say, no, we're just paying them for NIL.
But considering or putting this in practice, right, in practical terms, this is important because it's a tool to recruit new talents.
Absolutely. In practice, this is essentially paying them a salary, to the point that a lot of the key athletes in college football are being paid more than they could make in the pros. And in fact, one player, a quarterback for Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, is suing to be allowed to play in college as a so-called amateur longer because he's not an NFL prospect for various reasons.
And he's already 26, I believe.
Exactly. He's 26. They say you are not allowed to play in college past 26. And he is suing to say that is illegal. That is discrimination.
And there's an important case regarding Mark Cuban and Fernando Mendoza that became pretty famous last year with compensation / NIL. Yeah,
well, so for many, many years, those of you who follow American football, which I realize may be a small audience in this room, but such as it is, Indiana was nothing in college football for decades. Their last bowl win was 91. Their record in 2023, 2024 was 3-9, and that was typical. They lost more games than they won. They were nothing. Now, Mark Cuban, the billionaire, former of Broadcast.com, etc., he, and former owner of the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA, he is an alumni of Indiana University. Now, the story goes that the athletic director of Indiana said, we want to get this guy, Fernando Mendoza, who was a quarterback at a different school, to transfer. And the athletic director said to Mark Cuban, an alumni, we need more money. That's the quote. Mark Cuban donated an undisclosed amount of money to Indiana University. By the way, almost certainly a charitable donation under U.S. tax laws, which is another question we shouldn't get into. Indiana was able to get Mendoza, and in 2 years, they went from 3-9 to 16-0 and winning the national championship. They'd never been close to that before, and they suddenly do that.
And here, aquí Francisco, tal vez vale la pena hacer una diferencia.
Francisco, we need to do a differentiation in here between the line of a true agreement of NIL versus a fiction figure that allows to have the recruitment as a quarterback at Fernando Mendoza, that finally he won the highlight trophy, and he was sponsored by Adidas as well. Well, allow me to do a similarity. In the United States, go to do recruiting with underage athletes was prohibited. It's not prohibited here in Latin America. We, as a brand, always recruit a lot of youth people that are promises athletes, but we never have a limit. And the limit was the limitation, the money issues, or it could be personal things, elections for the brands. We didn't have in our country a regulatory body that prohibits and regulates these recruits. That's why when it appears the NIL, Adidas get open a different public. They have the chance to go to youth talents in a legal manner. I mean, Adidas is a Germany company that has stock that is in the stock change in, and there was impossible for a company like us. So we were always in the door. Now we have a concrete possibility. We are seeing this. Then we're going to see some pictures that will clarify what I am explaining. But we should go to our direct NIL to invest to the athlete since he is at high school. Follow him, help him to do the training. So then we'll be later the next Fernando Mendoza. So for the Adidas portfolio, he is very close and similar to Lionel Messi, for example. That's the importance of the athlete, and he is not yet a professional. He's just amateur. But if you see this, when we realize this, when you start to see that on videos, on global campaigns of Adidas appear this kind of athletes, it is because this is something phenomenal. At least for what Adidas consider it is important that they want to monetize in the American market. Without any doubt, I will go to the question. Why is the NIL so valuable for Adidas? You gave us a small introduction, but we have another important case linked to Adidas. Well, we are talking about 2021. Adidas signed in North America over 160 NIL contracts with a focus in basket and American football. With some running as well, we have sprinters, we have marathons, and we have these runners that go from Africa and they go to study to United States colleges, and Adidas found them. If you remember a month ago in London, the company displayed the record of 2 hours, so 160 athletes focused in basketball, American football, high school leagues. In soccer, we're investing in women's, more in women's than in men's football, soccer. This is a goal opportunity. We have a billionaire business opportunity, and finally the colleges. Do you remember the ones who are older that Adidas was always sponsoring different federation or selections, but we do not remember that they were investing in colleges or universities, but 8 of these Ivy League universities are important universities. We have from Indiana, we see Mendoza, and we the companies try to choose the universities according to sport. Not all the universities are strong in the same sport. So when we go out to search for basket, we focus in certain universities. For example, in soccer, we focus in another. So we have a different portfolio that are supplementary as well. There is a very interesting case in the past few days why it is so important now to find these talents before it happens. So we have the case of Pintain. We were laughing about this with José. Is not our athlete from Adidas. It's not that we are following him. We all know him because he is a great soccer player. But what José shows here, how in 15 days he transformed in one of the most relevant person in the whole World Cup. And it was a mass action through the social media. The Argentinian influencers said this should be our new image for the World Cup. So there are going to be brands that are already having meetings with Team Pain to monetize this moment of fame. This is a parallel like NIL. are in place. Basically, the Adidas dedicate to capture these opportunities and see the penetration into the North American market. There is a song. If you have a song of Tim Payne, we can hear it. Yes, Tim Payne has a cumbia already. It's very interesting the fact that now the digital era allows to monetize the image of in an easier way, and in matters of days, when you have 4,000 followers, now you have 4 million. I hope that he may have good lawyers for this. He should be monetizing already his image, her likeness, and his name. And from a legal perspective, you need to have some consideration about this. Yes, a lot of focus. The team as globally, we need to go out and have new contracts. We need to develop these new contracts so the pay to play is prohibited. So we did a re-engineering of our sponsor contracts. So the classical that are behind the athletes has a lot of joint initiatives. So if you are the best or you have a great performance, you're going to receive more money for the trademarks or the sponsorships. So and NIL invite us first to rethink this model and to adjust this to the American model of NCAA, that you pay to use punctually the image and certain rights of the athletes, but you cannot incentivize them that their performance improve, because that's not the spirit. And that's make it more complex because it's a more plain investment. It's not like coin. We have great recruiters that understand who is going to be the next prospect, but it is a lot of investments to then having a Fernando Mendoza in the pages of all the American newspaper using our Adidas slogan. So the value of the contract, that it is, the contract should be well written, and perhaps I am doing some spoil. But what does image mean?
Vamos al history of NIL. Obviamente que tenemos constituciones en Latinoamérica, tenemos leyes, tal vez no como las leyes que mencionaba Right of Publicity, que mencionaba ASIPI, pero sí tenemos un desarrollo de los derechos de imagen muy grande en Latinoamérica. Bueno, hemos buscado los abogados en esta industria un poco hacerlo más wide, ¿no? y buscar hasta la última posibilidad de monetizar estos atletas. Y estoy siendo muy...
Athletes, and excuse me, the channel is in Spanish. I want to be clear that behind nostalgia, how beautiful sports are, the interesting that sports is in North America, there is a business behind all that and a bunch of money on the table, and we want to part of that cake as well. Thank you, Francisco. And Zvi,
rights of publicity and the right athletes already had, why it became in the last few years such a disruptive issue and such an important issue?
So, for many years, it's been known that there was a bit of that, to some degree, the conferences were taking advantage of the student athletes, but as the money from college sports went up and up and up, it became much more obvious. And so NIL deals were not permitted. You weren't allowed to get any kind of money. Even stuff like just giving someone a car was actually quite controversial. There were actions about it. Now, in 2014, Ed O'Bannon sued the NCAA over use of his likeness in video games. O'Bannon had been a basketball star at UCLA. However, his pro career never quite worked out. He had knee problems. He was a perfect plaintiff because he was long retired. Any sanctions the NCAA might bring against him for bringing this suit were pretty much irrelevant. I will note that Mike McCann, who is a professor at Franklin Pierce, was part of O'Bannon's legal team and has written a wonderful book with Ed O'Bannon about this experience. And they won. Basically, they said Ed O'Bannon and other former college athletes were allowed to monetize their NIL. The case did not include contemporary college athletes, only retired ones, but it was still an important step. And this was based on antitrust law, saying that the NCAA is engaging in a restraintive trade, and it has to justify that restraintive trade under the Sherman Act, which is what determines antitrust law in the United States.
And just to go to the Alston decision, but it's important to make an emphasis in that it wasn't an IP or an NIL decision, but more of an antitrust decision, the Ed O'Bannon case.
So it was very interesting and really clever litigation strategy by the plaintiffs in what would become, it says NCAA versus Alston, but that's because it was reversing an appeal. The Alston class action plaintiffs, they didn't focus on NIL the way Ed O'Bannon did. They rather focused on certain non-educational benefits. And so the question in the Alston case was simply whether or not the NCAA is subject to the rule of reason or is entitled to a unique exception under antitrust law. The NCAA tried to argue that they were entitled to a special exception. The Supreme Court unanimously said no, in a majority opinion in a unanimous opinion, I should say, by Justice Gorsuch, which I will say is a pretty fun read as well. In his concurrence, I will say, Justice Kavanaugh, he never said NIL, but he did say this raises serious questions. And the thing is, everyone knew it. So the opinion just says, hey, we are just a technical opinion about the standard of review under U.S. antitrust law, but in practice, the floodgates opened very quickly.
But this was basically the turning point for athletes in college to receive a compensation without losing eligibility.
That's exactly right, because under the decision, the NCAA knew, following the O'Bannon case, which was explicitly about NIL, and the Alston case, which wasn't, but nonetheless, that the floodgates were open on NIL, and almost immediately the NIL deals became huge, very frequent.
Francisco, y uno de las discusiones
Francisco, of the discussions and agreements starting from consent. So consent has to comply with certain characteristics. Then we have to define protection of image or NIL in the U.S. versus protection of image in South America. That's more personal right, a constitutional right. So how do you manage that difference between agreements in Latin America versus the agreements in the U.S.? Well, Jose, there's a comment here. Certainly, North America has been a construction that was based on right of publicity, and once that consent is given under that law, the contract is shielded or is ironclad. It is difficult to avoid it. So regarding image rights and how our Constitution cares for this, well, I understand Ecuadorian law is very similar to Argentina in its Article 33. We have also developed contracts and we have written this. However, due to something that everyone knows that's called the ownership, stewardship, I think that those contracts are shaken up by this. Do we sign them? Yes. Are they ironclad? No. It's a parental authority. So there are issues of very high relevance between 15 and 17 years of age. Perhaps they have changed their agents, but another brand comes in then and they take them away, and it's difficult. Even though we do have consent from both parents, we have consent in writing, it's still difficult for us to retain them. And obviously, we are not a company that will go getting into lawsuits everywhere. So, therefore, we do have the contracts, we do have the consent, but the jurisprudence has shown us that in the past years, that as a trademark, as a brand, that's not so strong. It's not as ironclad. But when we go into the North American market, we are far more comfortable developing the contract in depending on the right of publicity and many laws, as was stated before. But in the end, we are a little bit more uncomfortable over here. My North American colleagues are flowing with far more certainty and security when they execute and sign and seal that contract. So, in the end, this is a personal right of the person. We protect their honor, their good name, and the other laws is more about commercial compensation. So the picture we added here is not a matter of chance. That is Pelusa, and the mustache. So for many of us, he's one of the most important athletes, perhaps most controversial, that came from Argentinian sports. If you remember, Diego had a very serious episode in 1994 in the World Cup where he basically was sick. He became ill in the United States, and he's suspended because of doping. And in that World Cup, Argentina was with Adidas, and they played with a blue jersey that was remembered by everyone. We had a brilliant idea as an organization to do a bring back of that jersey a few years ago. I'm a size M, in case you need to know. So if you remember, the launch went viral, quote unquote, by Messi in his social networks. You can search it. So what happened after launching that jersey? We had a beautiful. I'm sorry, my ears are very small. So I received a beautiful letter from the Maradona family saying that we were monetizing his image because we had a jersey that had number 10 on it, and it was a registered jersey by Adidas, whose design was archived in Adidas's archive in Germany. However, we had a very tense discussion with his heirs because they maintained that the number 10 was a property of Maradona and then of his heirs. By which, as a company, we are always taking risks and trying to define what image is, and well, the definition, I don't know if it's expanded, but it has extended through jurisprudence or maybe through contract clauses. The brands themselves give it such an open and extensive focus that then sometimes it can turn around and shoot ourselves in the foot. And we have to deal with, for those family now, trying to explain that number 10 on that specific jersey that belongs to Adidas, which is registered by Adidas, the number was designed by Adidas, that does not belong. It's not a misuse, it's not undue use of the Maradona brand. So, and then we go into discussions of what do we understand by NIL or in Latin America by image rights, because it's any element that identifies a person, and even we go into discussions regarding data protection, personal data protection, and that is trending now. And so I'm not trying to talk about Maradona here specifically, but I know that 10 is associated with him. So I think when we go to the coffee break in the next panel, perhaps many of you will discuss if that number 10, brings back and remembers memories if it reminds us of Maradona, Pelusa, Bigote, as he was called. But believe me that there was a very heated discussion that we had. It ended up well, but it would cost a lot. So, well,
NIL include voice, gesture, and other identifiers? How broad is this?
So those are traditionally part of a right of publicity. So, I mean, if you ask technically, does NIL include those? Probably not, but in practice, I think it's NIL is sort of being used as a shorthand for a variety of publicity. So I think you certainly could say it could in practice include those in a deal if the difference is not that great.
And while we were preparing this panel, you were telling us about different types of NIL deals. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. So NIL deal can be anything from a sponsorship from a local restaurant to a deal with Adidas and everything in between, as well as, like I said, perhaps less legitimate, I don't say legitimate, but less real NIL. So on one hand, a local restaurant might say, we will give you a TikTok sponsorship if you talk about let's say someone is a star on is a player in a local team, then you will have him do a little endorsement for a local restaurant. Say a local commercial, a TikTok sponsorship. This might even be give them a gift certificate for $500 in free food. It might also be these affiliate deals or promo codes. You might say, let's say that you are an Instagram influencer, like I mentioned, Livy Dunn, the gymnast at Louisiana State. She did a lot of this, where she was doing these affiliate deals with promo codes with various with these various brands. And there are really many options to that.
We're kind of running out of time, but Francisco, hay algunas cláusulas que son esenciales en sus acuerdos.
Sí, y de vuelta, las que ven ahí.
Francisco, there are any clauses that are essential for your contractual clauses? Yes. We have some from the typical athletes clauses, like for example an NIL contract, but what you see here you cannot explain that are the contractual authorization where the athletes have better performance. They have this layer consent at the moment that the NCAA change. This regulation will be done. So you can see that you have a cascade of these layer consents because the athlete contract with the team, from the team for the league or federation, at the same time with the third-party sub-licenses. Is like a cascade of consentment where you can see conflicts. Every time that we sign a contract with an athlete, we have consideration about this legal contract with their team, the law or the regulation, in this case from the AFA, the CONMEBOL, FIFA. This is something that we need to consider, and of course other contracts that the athletes may have that sometimes are overlap for this, right? And as we talked yesterday in the ambush panel, we see this approach of the company and we pick up the phone to have a conciliation with the rights. As you can see in the image, Messi was sponsored by Adidas, and they are playing into a team, in this case Argentina, that is sponsored by the same brand. But at the same time, you have a conflict because they are playing for a team that is sponsored by Nike. They're playing for a club, and we can have gray line in this case. Please let me tell you about something that Leo going to the Inter of Miami was something of the most wonderful things that ever happened as a company globally. Argentina, United States, because the chance to generate content, visibility, and impact on the brand has been very great, even though the Miami Inter are not even close to the Barcelona. There is no writing right that exists between the trademarks that we try not to be the ambush vehicle. I say this in the panel from yesterday. I was from the ambush. Do you remember River, the ambush marketing guy? So when we, for example, River play, we have Barcelona, but I'm going to speak what I truly know. When we go out to have a campaign and launch a t-shirt, everyone wants this shirt or jersey. Why? Because that becomes you as an idol. You are in a billboard on the street, on a video of this sponsor brand that create the collective conscious of the fans in something. Can I attract everyone? No, perhaps they are not more the most relevant. Perhaps is the competition the most relevant. Or perhaps one of the players that is working with Nike is the one that scored a goal. How do I do with Paredes to bring them to Adidas? So we have these unwritten rules that the digital and physical content that is generated should be minimal of 3 athletes. When we understand that we have 3 athletes in the same content or picture, so there is no an intention of an not appropriate association. This is an authorized use and is consent, passively consent by the 3 biggest brands of the industry. As well, we were talking about for Adidas and a different of other brands that have in United States. You have the scouting of this talent and our youth age, and the consentment is in the authorization is kind of a problem. Yes, we were talking about Fernando Mendoza as a very visible new case. I want to mention this as well. This is something that came close to me. This is the Diablito Echeverri. He was described as a new Messi when we didn't have the NIL prescriptions. We in Latin America go closer to find or search for this scouting for this emerging talent. Like in 12 or 13 years old, these kids already have these managers. So I signed this contract with him. Claudio has 12-year-old. And my boss, when he saw this, he said to me, "I'm not gonna sign this contract with this emerging talent. You are crazy." And I said to him, "I mean, you need to trust. I have two of the fathers of two of their parents downstairs, and he is gonna give a lot of joy." So, at 12-year-old, we signed this contract. Claudio played a little bit of time in River Plate. He is member of the AFA, and he is player of the City Group. Now he is in a Spain club, but we believe that he has a great potential. So the same thing happened in the United States, the same thing happened in Latin America.
There's a new regulatory landscape coming and evolving in the U.S. Could you tell us about this?
Sure. Well, I can tell you there is a great deal of flux and a very little certainty. Increasingly, college sports is resembling the pros, where people change their team very frequently. You've seen the evolution of this transfer portal. A quarter of the football bowl system players entered the transfer portal in 2026. That is so this is really showing the lie that these are just college students. These are pro athletes in some significant way. The NCAA has also set up the College Sports Commission to try to handle this new deluge of NIL. There have been urgings from the president. The executive order in 2025 said that the College Sports Commission should do certain things. A new executive order from April said there has to be an overhaul of NIL by August. Details of implementation remain unclear and legal challenges are pending. Only a few days ago, this new bill, Protect College Sports Act, was introduced. It's going to be bipartisan, have antitrust protection, and replace state patchwork. Whether it becomes law, I don't know, and I think people are optimistic, but not counting on it. This is in the shadow of what's called the House settlement, which is a settlement, despite the name, it is between someone named House as a class representative and the NCAA for $2.8 billion last year. It sets a $20.5 annual per school revenue cap. However, that's quickly become almost the minimum, especially the top quarterback deals are worth $4 to $8 million. And it's increasing the disparity between the haves and the have-nots in college athletics. Only 15 to 20% of Division I athletes get NIL deals. That's even a smaller percentage of college athletes as a whole. The median NIL deal is very small. It's for free French fries for a year for doing a TikTok ad. But the average is higher because there are some that are much, much more. There is a platform called NIL Go that Deloitte is running to review deals of over $600 for fair market value. There are, however, rumors of rampant cheating of that and lots of tactics to avoid it.
And does this is a state law matter? You were telling before that the different states have quite different way of regulating them, and this is a map that shows a state-by-state NIL laws, and there's only one state that has repealed this law.
Yeah, well, Alabama passed the law and very quickly realized it was getting in the way of their desire to win a national championship. So you know what happened? Less than 7 months later, they repealed it. Because it turns out the people who run the university athletic departments and the state legislators, they all know each other. And there is a desire to have the state be competitive. And I know in Texas right now, there's a lot of talk that the state NIL law is problematic. I wouldn't be surprised if Texas amends its NIL law next, although I'm just speaking personally there. I have no knowledge of that.
Pero, Svi, let me make a comment on this. The map is important because regarding what Svi was mentioning 3 seconds ago, for example, Texas is not the best of the states regarding this type of agreements. We as a brand, estoy en inglés, nosotros como marca,
we as a brand try to avoid that state because, for example, they prohibit from having contracts that allows the athlete to finish college. So what this creates is a window of opportunity so that the competition will steal the athlete away from us once they go pro. So that is a headache for us. Keep in mind that these contracts have a useful lifespan of between 4 to 8 years, depending on the sport. We have the larger events, the Super Bowl, World Football, or Libertadores in Latin America. So we look very closely at where we do the contract to not have these types of headaches.
Conclude, because we are running out of time, is the current framework sustainable? Was it better before the 2021 turning point? And what kind of lessons from the NCAA and the NIL new regulation can we adapt to Latin America?
So the first question's easy. No, it's not sustainable. The second, and asking whether or not it was better is hard to say. Everyone understood that the previous framework of a college's athletic programs being worth $50 billion and the athletes not being paid was unsustainable as well. So we went from one unsustainable system to a different one. What's the future? Probably recognizing that, I mean, I think if we look, when we look back on this in 10 years, we'll say, oh, the old system was not sustainable, then what we will, I think, see what we have now as a transitional system that was also unsustainable, and hopefully we'll have it figured out in 10 years. I think that's going to be a system that reflects the fact that it's increasingly international. I think that that there is a desire to sell Fernando Mendoza shirts well outside the U.S., and that this system is going to need to reflect the realities on the ground, as well as the core principles of NIL and IP.
One of the doubts that I have is, why does the NCAA has fear of opening up the system and quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers being paid by the universities?
I mean, honestly, incumbents who are doing very well don't want change. The NCAA officials, the athletic directors, the coaches are making so much money. The top coaches in NCAA are making even more than even the top players make on NIL. So there's a desire And for the schools, they want to use athletics as a fundraiser. They want it to be a place to make money and not a place to spend money. So there's a desire to try to keep that, and I think that's what's animating a lot of resistance. I think that's coupled with the fact there is a certain idea that college athletics is for students. It is that they are colleges, not sports teams.
But what we were talking yesterday with a coffee is that, for example, a really great NFL player like Travis Kelce does not even know how to write or read.
Well, I shouldn't say
Such
that.
a great student.
Well, it is sort of notorious. I mean, he hasn't said he can't read, but that he can't read a book. For instance, he can read a line or two, he can read words, but he hasn't read a whole book. And what does that mean? That he has graduated from college?
Of course.
Of course, it's a lie. To some degree, it's always been known that these are, I mean, I was telling you before we went on, in 1890, Woodrow Wilson, then the president of Princeton, said Princeton's 3 leading activities are baseball, football, and academics. So it's always been known there was a bit of a lie to saying these are student athletes. No, these are pro athletes at colleges.
Of course.
But how does that balance?
Francisco, ¿y qué takeaway tenemos?
Francisco, what takeaway do you have from this system, from the NCAA and the NIL for South America, Latin America?
Dos ideas. Primero, complementar.
First, complementing with what you said, the system is not sustainable. Talking with an American colleague yesterday, they told me that in the last 12 months they started seeing formal complaints from universities against athletes for changes in university. That's a real light. And in Latin America, despite the parallels that we have built during this discussion, there is no possibility to replicate this. The university in Latin America has a very concrete role. It's a little bit different than the role that a university has, as was mentioned by Zvi, that is sports, then academia. He said they don't have the incentives, we don't have the money, so there is no economic development here, so that we start seeing that the breeding grounds of Latin American sports be found in high schools and universities and such. So at the end of the day, here in Latin America, the system has been built, and that is why we could sign on Diablito and such. So we have to, it doesn't evolve in that manner. Thank you very much to both. We have a few seconds for questions. I don't know if anyone has a question. Any doubts?
Unos segunditos, unos minutitos.
Sí, hay un par de preguntas.
Gracias. SB, it's a question for you.
Una pregunta. Question.
U.S. law, a minor can repudiate a contract when they reach adult age, meaning when they reach 18. Do you see any problem with situations where, like in Argentina, they're signing kids in high school or in middle school? Is that something that could happen in the U.S. That, in Florida we see a case that the kid's suing the parents after he reached adulthood for whatever happened when he was signed out when he was a minor?
So high school NIL is already happening in the U.S. As for middle school, I'm not aware of that happening, but it's plausible, I guess. As for the parents, ideally it would be handled kind of like it's handled in Hollywood for child actors, which is there are certain laws protecting them. That said, of course, a lot of that is under California law. And I don't think states like, I'm thinking of Louisiana, for instance, have the same protections for minors, for children, that California has. And I think we're going to see some lawsuits that force other states to have stronger protections under NIL.
Maybe one last question, una última pregunta.
Justin from Chicago, a question for you, Rodrigo. What's the profile of students, athletes that you are looking for beyond the talent and the age. And what is the advice that you will like to provide to the athletes and parents to maximize the change to arrive to this NIL? Francisco? I want to try to be honest with you. The profile is not only should not only be technical or the performance for athletes that had a high potential, but we have seen not in the industry that there are athletes that manage their image, that they had agencies behind that monetize this beyond the branding or sponsorship than just working with us with Adidas, and generates a lot of visibility, and they put this brand in a hot spot. And today the good use of social media is a great differential. When you have these pro NBA contracts, you have clauses of bonds related to the growth into the social media. This is something new for me. In Latin America, we never had this, and now this is something that is been very well work in United States. We are the sport business. That's basic, but the healthy bonds and the people that have the companies that have the people behind allows to have opportunities of brands, not only the self-generated. I am a father. What can I say? I will say to him, go and study. Go to take your lesson, because you have 100 contracts of NIL that are a success. Like there are only 2, and they are 98 kids. So this is a real life, and Latin America is worth. So please never stop going to school, studying, because I love the approach of the United States that allows to end this school. In Latin America, a few clubs that support the youth player to finish at least high school. River Plate has this. Is one of the most advanced support institutions that take care of the athletes that to find a different career or a way to go to the college. That's how we are working as a brand, supporting these proposal and processes for education. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, Svi. And thank you to all the assistants. But thank you to the executive committee, Ricky. I love the preparation of this panel, and I love to work with these 2 main great panelism. But Francisco tell to me you should be Fernando Redondo distributing the question. So then we are gonna have a negotiation about my NIL for the next ASIPI. So thank you very much, everyone.
Right.